If you've been reheating the same leftovers for lunch or dinner all week, how certain are you that those foods are as harmless as they feel? I don't mean whether they still taste good. I mean whether that reheated pizza, that second bowl of soup, that microwave container of noodles, is quietly doing something to your blood pressure that you never connected to the meal itself. Most people think high blood pressure comes from obvious things: stress, age, bad genetics, maybe the salt shaker on the table. But that picture is incomplete. Because for a lot of adults over 60, the real problem isn't the pinch of salt you add at dinner. It's the repeat exposure to the same processed, sodium-heavy convenience foods that get cooked once, stored, then heated again and again until they become part of your routine. And that routine matters more than most people realize. Before we begin, please subscribe to this channel so you never miss simple, honest health guidance that could protect you. Because today we're going to talk about something that sounds ordinary, even harmless, but can quietly keep blood pressure elevated in a way that frustrates a lot of seniors. And I want to begin with a woman named Patricia, because her story explains why this topic matters so much more than people think. Patricia was 72, organized, independent, and proud of the fact that she ate at home. That was how she described it to me. She said, "I don't eat junk. I don't go out much. I'm careful." And on the surface, that sounded excellent. But when we walked through what her week actually looked like, the pattern was completely different. Sunday night, she ordered pizza because her grandchildren visited. Monday, she reheated 2 slices for lunch. Tuesday, she had canned soup with crackers. Wednesday, she reheated Chinese takeout. Thursday, it was deli turkey on toast. Friday, leftover fried chicken from a family dinner. She wasn't overeating. She wasn't adding much salt. But her blood pressure kept creeping up, and she couldn't understand why. That is the trap I want to help you see today. Because this conversation is not really about reheating as a cooking method. Reheating itself is not the villain. The problem is that the foods people most often reheat are usually the exact foods that are most likely to be loaded with sodium, preservatives, salty sauces, breading, or concentrated restaurant seasoning. And when you eat those foods once, that's one thing. When you turn them into lunch the next day, maybe dinner again the next night, and then rotate into a similar processed food after that, you are not having an occasional indulgence anymore. You are building a blood pressure pattern, and blood pressure responds to patterns much more than it responds to isolated moments. Let's make this really simple. Sodium pulls water with it. That means when you eat a high sodium meal, your body tends to hold onto more fluid to keep things balanced. More fluid in the circulation can mean more volume in the blood vessels. More volume means more pressure on the vessel walls. Over time, that strains the heart, the arteries, and the kidneys. Now, not everyone responds identically. Some people are more salt sensitive than others. But older adults are much more likely to be affected. So if you are over 60 and your blood pressure is already borderline or treated with medication, the same reheated meal that feels normal can hit your system harder than it would have 20 years ago. And here's what makes this so deceptive. Most people are looking in the wrong direction. They think, well, I barely use the salt shaker. But most of the sodium people consume doesn't come from the salt they add at the table. It comes from packaged foods, canned foods, frozen meals, restaurant meals, deli meats, pizza, soups, sandwiches, sauces, breaded meats, and fast food. In other words, the exact foods that commonly become leftovers. That's why someone can honestly believe they are eating pretty carefully while their blood pressure remains stubbornly high. They are watching the visible salt, but they're missing the sodium built into the food before it ever reaches the microwave. That's the part many people never get taught clearly. So let's go through the reheated foods I most want you to be cautious about, starting with one of the biggest offenders, pizza. Pizza is one of those foods people don't even think twice about reheating. It's easy, it's cheap, it's satisfying, and it tastes almost as good the next day. Sometimes people even like it more the next day. But pizza is a blood pressure triple hit. First, the cheese carries sodium. Second, the sauce carries sodium. Third, the crust, Toppings and processed meats like pepperoni or sausage add even more. And because pizza is so easy to eat casually, people underestimate the portion. Two reheated slices at noon, another slice standing at the kitchen counter later, and suddenly what felt like leftovers has become a high-sodium event. Now imagine that happening while you are already taking blood pressure medication. You wake up, take your pill, and assume you're covered. Then lunch is reheated pizza, dinner is soup from a carton, and by evening your rings feel tighter, and your pressure is higher than expected. So you blame the medication, you blame stress, you blame age, but the food pattern is right there. And with pizza, there's another issue people overlook, especially seniors who live alone. Pizza is often eaten with very little produce, very little fiber, and almost no potassium-rich side foods to help balance the sodium load. So it isn't just what pizza contains, it's what it displaces. It pushes out the foods that would have helped your blood pressure more. The better move is not perfection, it's design. If pizza shows up in your house, don't make it the next day automatic lunch unless you control the rest of the meal. One slice with a large salad, extra vegetables, no processed meat toppings, and water is very different from 3 slices reheated by themselves. Better yet, if you know you like leftovers, build them from the start. Thin crust, lighter cheese, vegetable toppings, and a real side. That one decision changes the blood pressure impact dramatically. And if pizza is something you find yourself reheating 2 or 3 times a week, that is not a harmless habit. That is one of the first things I would want you to notice if your numbers have been running high. The second major category is soup, especially canned soup, instant noodle soup, and takeout soups. These are some of the most misunderstood foods in blood pressure management because they feel gentle. They feel almost medicinal. People think soup is what you eat when you're trying to be sensible, but some soups are sodium bombs in disguise. A bowl doesn't look heavy. It isn't greasy in an obvious way. It goes down easily, especially if chewing is difficult or appetite is low. And that's exactly why so many older adults drift into eating it several times a week. Sometimes every day in cold weather. Then they wonder why the blood pressure cuff keeps giving them numbers they don't like. Instant noodle soups are particularly rough here because the broth, seasoning packet, and noodles together can carry a remarkable sodium load for such a small meal. The same is true for many canned soups and deli counter soups. And with restaurant soups, the portion size makes it even easier to overshoot without noticing. One large container can easily become 2 salty meals. Then you reheat the second half tomorrow and tell yourself you made a healthy choice because you stayed home. That's the psychological trick. The meal feels modest, but the sodium is not modest. It's quietly concentrated, and because it's liquid, people don't mentally categorize it as salty food the way they would chips or bacon. If soup is part of your routine, the safest way to keep it there is to control the type. Low sodium broth, beans, vegetables, barley, chicken you cooked yourself, herbs instead of seasoning packets, and no salt-added canned ingredients when possible. And if you use canned beans or vegetables, rinsing them helps. That's the difference between a blood pressure supportive soup and a blood pressure disruptive soup. What I don't want is the pattern where you rely on instant noodles, canned chowders, creamy takeout soups, or heavily seasoned frozen soup bowls, and assume they're fine because they aren't fried. That assumption catches a lot of people. Not fried does not mean friendly to your blood pressure. Third, I want to talk about reheated processed meats: ham, bacon, sausage, deli turkey, deli roast beef, pastrami, salami, and all the meats people slide into eggs, sandwiches, breakfast plates, or quick snack meals. These foods are everywhere in senior households because they are convenient. They require almost no prep. You can eat them cold, toss them in a skillet, or microwave them in seconds. But convenience is often exactly what makes a food dangerous when you're managing blood pressure. Processed meats are typically preserved and seasoned with large amounts of sodium, and many people don't stop at one exposure. They'll have ham in the morning, a turkey sandwich at lunch, and then sausage with leftovers the next day without realizing they are stacking sodium from one processed source on top of another. And the trouble here is not just the number on the label, it's the way processed meats invite repetition. A package of deli meat doesn't feel like takeout. A reheated piece of ham doesn't feel indulgent. It feels practical, tidy, responsible. But those foods can keep blood pressure elevated, contribute to fluid retention in sensitive people, and make a light meal much less light than it appears. This is especially important if you've ever noticed that your fingers swell a little, your ankles feel puffy by evening, or your pressure is mysteriously higher after what you thought was a small meal. Processed meats are often the missing clue there. They are easy to underestimate, precisely because they look controlled and portioned. If you want protein leftovers that don't work against you the same way, think plain roasted chicken, baked fish, beans, lentils, eggs without processed meat added, or home-cooked turkey breast that wasn't packed in a sodium solution. Those foods can absolutely be reheated. The issue is not warm protein. It's preserved, seasoned, sodium-dense protein. That distinction matters. And if you are someone who has been told, just eat a little turkey sandwich, please understand that the bread, the deli meat, the cheese, the mustard, and the pickle can turn a tiny lunch into a pressure-raising meal faster than most people imagine. This is where blood pressure management gets lost, not in dramatic cheat meals, but in the everyday foods that seem too ordinary to question. The fourth category is reheated fried chicken, breaded fish, fried takeout, and crispy leftovers from restaurants. People rarely think of these foods as blood pressure foods. They think of them as weight foods or cholesterol foods. But high blood pressure is part of the picture too. Why? Because fried and breaded restaurant foods are often heavily salted before cooking, salted again in seasoning mixes, and then dipped into sauces that carry even more sodium. Reheating them the next day doesn't remove any of that. It just makes them convenient enough to eat again. And because they're leftovers, people often eat them without much thought. They become a side decision instead of a planned meal, which means portion control tends to disappear. I've seen this so many times. Someone has a family gathering, there's fried chicken left over, and they don't want to waste it. So now, lunch is 2 cold pieces. Then dinner is 1 reheated piece with some mashed potatoes. Then the last piece gets eaten standing in the kitchen the next afternoon. It doesn't feel like repeated exposure because the meal originated in a social event. But your blood vessels do not care where the food came from. They care what chemistry showed up in your bloodstream. And with salty fried leftovers, that chemistry includes sodium, refined breading, and often sauces or sides that push the meal even further in the wrong direction. The fifth category is reheated Chinese takeout, teriyaki bowls, saucy noodle dishes, fried rice, and many other restaurant rice or noodle leftovers. These are classic leftover foods because they reheat well, they're filling, and you usually get enough for 2 or 3 meals. But this is exactly why they cause trouble. The sodium often sits in the sauces, soy sauce, teriyaki, oyster sauce, bottled stir-fry bases, seasoned broths, and restaurant marinades. Then the leftovers get reheated with the sauce, still coating every bite. So you're not just warming rice, you are warming a concentrated, heavily seasoned mixture that was designed for flavor impact, not blood pressure control. And because it contains grains, meat, and sauce together, people treat it like a full meal and assume it's balanced. This is also where the phrase, "I only had a small bowl," becomes misleading. A small bowl of a highly seasoned rice or noodle dish can still deliver an impressive sodium load. Add an egg roll, some soy sauce at the table, or a few bites saved from the container later, and now the day's total looks very different. If you love these foods, the answer is not that you can never enjoy them again. It's that they should stop being standard leftovers if your pressure is difficult to control. A homemade rice bowl with plain rice, vegetables, unbreaded protein, and a lighter sauce is one thing. Reheated restaurant takeout swimming in sauce, several times a week, is something very different. The sixth category is frozen dinners, prepared casseroles, and pre-seasoned supermarket proteins, including some rotisserie chickens and ready-to-heat entrees. These are especially common in older adults because they solve a real problem: energy. Not everybody wants to cook every night. Not everybody can. So I want to respect the appeal here. Convenience matters, but convenience often comes packaged with sodium. Frozen dinners can look portion-controlled and medically sensible, yet some are packed with salty sauces, seasoned starches, cheese, breading, and preserved meats. The same goes for some prepared supermarket meals. And once they're in your freezer or fridge, they become default dinners, which means the sodium exposure becomes routine rather than occasional. Pre-seasoned meats deserve a special warning. Many people assume plain-looking chicken is plain chicken. It isn't always. Some products are injected or packaged with broth, saline, or sodium solution to improve flavor and texture. So now a meal that appears simple is already salted before you do a single thing. Then if you pair it with seasoned rice, canned vegetables, or packaged gravy, you've built a whole high-sodium plate without ever feeling like you ate junk food. That's why so many thoughtful, disciplined adults are confused by their blood pressure. They're not making wild choices. They're making normal, modern choices. And normal, modern choices, unfortunately, are often stacked with sodium in ways that don't announce themselves clearly. Now I want to point out a pattern that ties all of these foods together: the sauces, condiments, and add-ons that get invited to the plate when leftovers are reheated. Ketchup on the fried potatoes, soy sauce on the rice bowl, ranch on the pizza crust, hot sauce on the eggs and deli meat, gravy on the frozen entree, mustard and pickles on the sandwich. These little companions matter. One of the most dangerous myths in nutrition is that only the main food counts. That is completely false. Sometimes the sodium problem isn't the chicken or rice itself. It's what you revived with it. The leftover becomes a vehicle for salty extras, and those extras can quietly push the meal over the edge. So what might your body actually feel after these meals? Sometimes not much. That's what makes this dangerous. High blood pressure often stays silent, but some people notice clues: thirst that seems stronger than usual, rings tighter at night, mild ankle swelling, a puffy face in the morning, feeling slightly heavy after dinner, waking up more during the night, or seeing an unexpectedly high reading on the blood pressure cuff after a day of leftovers and convenience meals, and then they dismiss it. Must have been stress. Maybe I didn't sleep well. Maybe the machine was wrong. Maybe. But if that same pattern happens after salty reheated foods, your body may be giving you a much clearer answer than you realize. This also matters if you are on blood pressure medication. Many people think medication creates a protective shield around their choices. It doesn't work that way. Medication helps, sometimes dramatically, but it can still be pushed against by repeated high-sodium eating. I have met plenty of patients who assumed their medicine had stopped working, when the real shift was that their food routine had changed. More takeout, more leftovers, more prepared foods because they were tired, busy, grieving, traveling, or caring for a spouse. And suddenly, the numbers were worse. Not because the pill failed, but because the daily environment around the pill changed. Food can make management easier, or food can make the job of those medications much harder. And let me say something important here, because I do not want this video misunderstood. I am not telling you that every reheated food is bad. Leftovers can be one of the smartest tools for protecting blood pressure when they come from the right kind of meal. Reheated lentil stew you cooked yourself, roasted vegetables, baked salmon, homemade chili with no salt-added ingredients, plain brown rice, oatmeal, bean soup you controlled, grilled chicken without heavy seasoning, these can be excellent. Reheating is not the problem. Reheating the wrong foods over and over is the problem. That distinction could save you from unnecessary fear and also from the opposite mistake, which is comforting yourself with the phrase, "It's just leftovers," when those leftovers are exactly what's driving the issue. In fact, some of the best blood pressure-friendly habits I see in older adults involve intentional leftovers. They cook once and eat well 2 or 3 times. A tray of roasted vegetables, a pot of low-sodium soup, a batch of beans, baked chicken with herbs instead of seasoning salt, fresh fruit already washed and visible, brown rice or quinoa ready to go. Those leftovers make healthy eating easier instead of harder. That is the kind of reheating I want in your life. What I don't want is the emergency food lifestyle where every meal is the salty survival version of convenience. Because that lifestyle is easy to slip into when you're tired, and once it becomes normal, blood pressure often starts telling the story before your habits fully register in your mind. There's another reason this topic matters for seniors, and it goes beyond blood pressure alone. Food safety. Some older adults are not only reheating the wrong foods, they're reheating them in the wrong way. If leftovers sit out too long before refrigeration, if they stay in the fridge too many days, or if they are warmed unevenly, the risk changes. So let me give you the simple rule. Refrigerate leftovers promptly, ideally within 2 hours, and when reheating, make sure they get fully hot all the way through. Soups should be steaming. Foods should be heated thoroughly, not just lukewarm in the center. Because the last thing you need on top of blood pressure issues is a foodborne illness that dehydrates you and creates an even bigger health problem. I remember Patricia looking genuinely surprised when we broke this down. She said, "But I thought I was saving money and being responsible." And she was. That's what made it so hard for her to see. Her intentions were good. The pattern was the problem. Once she shifted just a few things, no more instant noodle lunches, deli meat only occasionally, pizza no longer an automatic next-day meal, homemade soup instead of canned, and more simple cooked foods she could reheat safely, her home readings improved enough that she finally felt she understood what had been happening. Not overnight and not magically, but clearly, and clarity matters. Because once you see the pattern, you stop blaming yourself vaguely and start making targeted changes that actually help. So let me ask you something, and I really want you to think about it. Which food in your kitchen is most likely to become tomorrow's microwave meal? Is it pizza, soup, rice dishes, ham, fried leftovers, frozen dinners? Because whatever that answer is, that is the food you should inspect first if your blood pressure has been stubborn. Don't just ask, "What did I eat today?" Ask, "What do I re-eat every week?" That question is smarter. That question gets closer to the truth. And if you're getting value from this, leave the word leftovers in the comments. I always look through them, and it helps me understand what people are really struggling with at home. Now let's get practical, because awareness without a plan doesn't carry you very far. When you shop, compare labels, not just calories, not just sugar, not just fat. Look at sodium. Compare one soup brand to another, one frozen meal to another, one deli turkey to another. The numbers can be wildly different, even when the packages look almost identical. Look for no salt added, low sodium, or reduced sodium versions when the food is something you use often. Rinse canned beans and vegetables. Choose frozen vegetables without sauces. Buy plain proteins more often than seasoned ones. And if you know you're going to want leftovers, build the first meal around that reality. Cook something tomorrow you can safely reheat without undoing today's good intentions. That one mindset shift changes a lot. And if you eat out, think ahead to the leftover before you place the order. This is one of the easiest ways to lower sodium without feeling deprived. Order grilled instead of breaded. Ask for sauce on the side. Skip processed meat toppings. Split the portion before you even begin eating. Add a vegetable side. Don't let a single restaurant meal become 2 or 3 days of salty repeat exposure, because that's what often happens. The dinner out is not the whole story. The leftovers are part of the same story. And when those leftovers come back the next afternoon and again the next night, what felt like one indulgence has quietly turned into a blood pressure pattern. You have to count the echo of the meal, not just the meal itself. I also want to speak to the people who say, "Well, I don't want to waste food." I understand that completely. Waste bothers me too. But there's a difference between reducing waste and recycling harm. If a food is working against your health, forcing yourself to finish it because it's already paid for is not actually saving you. It's just transferring the cost from your wallet to your body. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is portion less, share more, freeze differently, or choose a healthier leftover candidate in the first place. That is not being picky. That is being strategic. A lot of adults over 60 have spent their whole lives being responsible with food, and I respect that deeply. But health responsibility counts too. Here's another subtle trap. People often think the answer is simply to drink more water after a salty meal and flush it out. Water matters, yes, but that does not erase the sodium load or the blood pressure effect of a bad routine. One glass of water cannot cancel repeated processed meals any more than one walk cancels 6 days on the couch. The body doesn't work through guilt erasers. It works through patterns. So if you've been using water, lemon, tea, or a healthy breakfast the next morning to compensate for repeated, reheated salty foods, I want you to stop relying on that bargain. It's not that those choices are bad. It's that they are not enough by themselves, if the main pattern hasn't changed. And please don't overlook breakfast in this conversation. Some of the highest sodium reheated foods show up early in the day. Leftover pizza, bacon, ham, sausage, packaged breakfast sandwiches, reheated breakfast burritos, even soups some people warm up in winter. Then by noon, a big chunk of the day's sodium budget is already gone. That matters because the rest of the day still exists. Lunch still happens. Dinner still happens. Snacks still happen. So when people tell me, I don't eat that badly, sometimes what they mean is they don't eat dessert or they don't snack much. But the real driver is sitting right there in breakfast, disguised as convenience. The first meal can set up the entire blood pressure tone for the day more than people realize. Let me give you a simple replacement mindset. Instead of asking, what can I reheat fast? Ask, what can I reheat that still looks like real food? Real food has recognizable ingredients and does not depend on salty preservation to taste good. A bowl of beans and vegetables, baked fish and potatoes with herbs, chicken and roasted carrots, oatmeal with fruit, plain yogurt and nuts, homemade soup where you controlled the broth, leftover rice with eggs and vegetables, lightly seasoned. Those meals are not glamorous, but they behave differently inside the body. And when someone tells me their blood pressure improved after eating cleaner, that phrase usually means this exact shift happened. They stopped reheating convenience and started reheating intention. That is a much more useful way to think about it.